Welcome to the Generic Tech Support YouTube channel, a channel that knows what it's like not to have a girlfriend. Like and subscribe for more content. Hey channel, happy Valentine's Day. Some of you may have guessed it, we're looking at Kali Linux today. Some of you may have questions as to why on Valentine's Day we would be looking at Kali Linux. That's a fair question. As crazy as it may sound, Kali Linux has a tendency of releasing the latest upgrades to their packages on Valentine's Day, which really does lead to some questions. Specifically, how bad of a date would you have had to be on in order to think, I know, I really need Kali Linux today? So for that, I'm going to ask you guys, put something down in the comment. What is the actual worst date you have ever been on in your life? And go into some details. No names, none of that stuff. If you want to make up names for people, that's fine. But add some information down there. I'm really curious. What's the worst date that you've ever been on? And have you ever thought to yourself, you know, this date's so bad, I'm going to go work on an ethical hacker program? For obvious reasons, I would never suggest hacking into anybody's system, especially somebody that you were dating or found that you were dating. However, I do find it somewhat ironic that on Valentine's Day of all days, where us, specifically us as nerds, generally speaking, we don't have the most or the best of luck with women. Now, that's not to say that not some of us are not gifted in the fact that we're good at picking up girls, but for the vast majority of us, we're a little socially awkward, and we probably don't have a huge amount of experience or background with different women or girls. With that said, I realize that today is a little different. Nerdy people tend to be a little more popular, whereas back when I grew up, if you were a nerd, you were stuffed into lockers and everything else. It was pretty awful. But, you know, you learn from that stuff, right? You build thick skin. So, you know, it really gears you more for life, because once you get out of school and you think it gets better, it really doesn't. You just get bullied from a different perspective. And when you're young, you get bullied because people suck. And when you get old, you get bullied because companies suck. That's the way it works. That's life. But let's talk about Kali Linux a little bit. So if you don't know what Kali Linux is, it's actually a Debian-based package, much like your Ubuntu or your Mint system. It will run most of the Debian-based configurations, your snaps, your flatpaks. It will install apt-based packages on your system, just like the Mint operating system would. It does offer a different level of security on the system to actually secure the system, but that's not what makes it popular. So what makes this operating system popular is the fact that it comes with a lot of really cool tools. So if we click on the Start menu, so the Applications menu as it's called in this particular operating system, which, by the way, this is running XFCE, which is the desktop revision that it's running. Much like GNOME has its own desktop, and Cinnamon's its own desktop, and Trinity, and there's, you know, Plasma. There's all these different desktops, but the core OS is the same. Think of it a lot in like, if you think of it like Windows terms, look at it like, OpenShell or window blinds. That's basically what this is. It's just a wrapper on top of an operating system that changes the way it looks aesthetically. But the core OS is exactly the same between all those systems. They just run a different front end. And you could actually install that front end on every system. So if we wanted to install Cinnamon on Kali, we could. We could install Plasma. We can install GNOME. It's all options that you can install on any of those actual Debian-based systems. That's what gives you the ability to customize these systems so greatly in comparison to Windows, where Windows is really closed source. So you may have some applications that change the way the original looks, but it doesn't really change the function. Whereas these different desktop platforms inside of the Linux operating system really do change the function of the OS, where things are, how they're laid out, and the aesthetic value, which makes them a lot more customizable and a lot more fun. So let's jump into this and take a look at some of the packages that are pre-installed with Kali Linux. So we're going to see that we have things like information gathering and a variety of different methods of information gathering. We're going to have vulnerability analysis. So we could scan for different vulnerabilities on our infrastructure or through our systems or our phone system. We're going to have web application analysis. We could check out different web apps, web applications out there on the net and scan them. Now, this is not designed for you to go out and like scan Google. This is designed for you to scan the website that you host yourself. You're not going to go scan somebody else's cloud-based website or hosted website that you pay for. That's not what this is designed for. You don't want to use any of these tools against anything that you don't own, because that's not necessarily legal. That labels you as a hacker. And you don't want to be labeled as a hacker if you don't know what you're doing. So if you're coming from your own personal IP address, don't do that. But if you're going to do this to like test out your vulnerability on your internal infrastructure, go for it. If you're going to do this to test out and learn it, like maybe you have a home firewall that you could set up your own LAN where you could basically test this on your own internal infrastructure to like a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 desktop, knock yourself out. But do not use this to test against things on the web. It's not legal. It's not a good idea. You're going to get caught, especially if you don't know what you're doing. I mean, especially if you don't have your IP address spoofed. Don't do this. And if you think, hey, that's okay, I have NordVPN, that'll protect me, it won't. So, all right, so we got database assessment. So we could go in, we could do like SQL map. It's kind of cool. You can map the actual SQL database. Password attacks. This is all stuff designed to crack passwords. Most of it's library based, so like you could create a word list of like common passwords and then run that against a Windows system with just a default like administrator username, which is why when you go through a Windows installation now, it doesn't allow you to use administrator as your username. You have to create a username during the installation. It's because stuff like this exists where if it has to guess the username, it takes twice the amount of time. But if it just has to guess the password on a common username, then literally it could sit there all day long and just guess over and over and over again until it actually cracks the password to get into the system. Then we have wireless attacks. So you could use these to like, there's AirCrack and G. These are basically designed to crack wireless passwords or wireless access into wireless systems, networks. Back in the day when we used to have WEP, WEP was super easy to crack. You could run one of these tools through the old school version of Kali, which was Backtrack, which is technically not the same OS. It was built off of Knoppix, which Knoppix itself was built off of the Debian package. So it was kind of like a Taco Bell inside of a Taco Bell inside of a taco. So it didn't make sense anymore. So they just kind of rewrote it and created Kali Linux, which is what we're looking at. So then we have reverse engineering. We have exploitation tools. Like there's probably Metasploit. There's Metasploit framework in here. We have sniffing and spoofing. We have post-exploitation. So something with sniffing and spoofing is you'll notice Wireshark is in here. And the reason why is because you could actually use Wireshark to pick up VoIP calls on an internal LAN and listen to them with the PCAP. It's really kind of interesting. We may go into that at some point where I could show you how to do that. It's relatively straightforward and easy to do, but it's not really designed for like hacking purposes. It's designed for troubleshooting. So if you're troubleshooting like a VoIP-based infrastructure where you have phones on your network where maybe you have crackling in them, or you have phones on your network where two people can't talk, so one person can talk, but then if another person talks, they can't hear them on the same call. Then you could also troubleshoot things like crosstalk in the actual lines. You could troubleshoot a lot of different things using Wireshark with VoIP. So it's super helpful for that. And it's available on Windows too. Something to keep in mind is that you never want to use Windows to hack. You could download basically all of these tools or most of these tools on a Windows system. You don't want to do that. So what else we got? We got the post-exploitation. So we can see that in here. So there's Netcat, that's a popular one. You have forensics. So here's a whole bunch of forensic tools that you could do. Forensic imaging, carving, PDF forensic tools, auto spy. Then there's reporting tools. So you can create reports based off of some of the things that you run. Social engineering tools in here as well. And then there's the Kali and OffSec tools. So information on all these tools, how this stuff works, the exploit database, yada, yada, yada. So as you can see, the Kali Linux is a huge package. It offers a lot of variables, a lot of configurations. And we may touch base on some of these things. I have a Windows 11 machine built on a domain that has its own firewall. It's off of a VLAN, so we could actually test a lot of this stuff on our internal LAN here to test how this stuff looks and how it works when attempting to do an attack or a hack against a Windows machine. And I say that loosely because this is considered what I would call an ethical hack or a penetration test. It is not the same thing as somebody trying to attempt to steal something from somebody else. I do not condone that. Do not do that. This application is 100% designed to test your own internal infrastructure for vulnerabilities. So you'll probably ask, well, why wouldn't I use Windows then? And the reason why is because Windows leaves a footprint and a thumbprint. Every time Windows does something, you know Windows was there. But Linux, specifically Kali Linux, and also there's Black Arch, and there's a variety of different flavors of the same type of operating system on different flavors of kernels, like different kernel versions, like Arch and Fedora. They each have their own revision. I just choose the Debian packages because they're the most common and likely the most common used for the home user. So if you're running Linux Mint, you could download Kali Linux and you could use it. You can run all the same commands you use in your Linux Mint, which is why I'm so adamant about learning the command line versus just learning the GUI, because if you know the command line, you could work on all of these OSs and not just one. So what I just showed you here in the start menu is really only a very small portion of this operating system. There's a lot that's involved. As a matter of fact, this OS is tremendous. So out of the box, with all the tools installed and all the updates, I think it's somewhere around 17 or 18 gigs installed, which is very big for a Linux system. It also requires quite a bit of horsepower to run, and the more you have on your system, the better it is. So if you're running, a NVIDIA video card, that's good because now you can use the GPU's memory. If you're running an external NIC card on a PCI Express slot, that's like a 10 gig connection, that speeds up your connection. If you're running a wireless card in your system, then that gives you the options for the wireless cracking tools. And I say cracking loosely because, again, we're talking pen testing on your internal infrastructure. If you have a PDF builder like an Adobe Pro on a Windows machine, you could use the PDF analysis tools through the Kali Linux to scan and manage those things so you could see what that data actually looks like when you're comparing it to an actual created PDF document off of a Windows system. So this is really not designed to be run on slow or old hardware. But because it runs the Debian-based kernel, it's also not designed to be run on the newest hardware. You really don't want to run this on anything newer than a 12th gen Intel. You really don't want to run it anything older than like a 10th gen Intel. You really don't have much of a threshold in there. It was originally designed to run on Dell hardware. So if you're running a Dell machine in that generation, all of the drivers work out of the box. That's not to say that it won't work on an HP or a Lenovo or a custom build. It works on those systems too, and it honestly works just fine on my custom build here with my Ryzen 9. However, it is important to note that the reason why Debian works so well on Dell is because Dell sells machines with Debian OSs pre-installed. And then obviously, if you have a manufacturer backing your operating system, the development of the manufacturer into the drivers that run on their specific machines is usually well spent, right? So they spend the money, they have the resources, they build you out packages, and they just work. So if you're on like a Vostro, you can run Kali right out the box. You won't have a single problem because Vostros are shipped in other countries that come with Debian or Ubuntu on those actual systems from the factory. Okay, so I don't want to go super hardcore into all of the tools all at once because I think that's tool overload. And quite frankly, I don't want these videos to be like 4 million hours long because there's quite a bit in Kali. And we could really go over all of what Kali has to offer. But again, today's Valentine's Day. And as a result, I'm just going to give you something that's a little fun to work with. Let's use a tool that specifically is in the system. It's called DNS Recon. So if we go into information gathering and DNS analysis, we'll see DNS Recon offered here. Now, the thing about DNS Recon is it's a fantastic tool for every IT person to use. And the reason why I say that is because it actually pulls back records and record details for all DNS type of lookups. It's like NS lookup, but on steroids. So it pulls back a ton of information. And it's something that you can actually query regular DNS servers with and not have to worry too much about what it is that it pulls back as far as like information or being something that has to do with, some kind of concern. So the reason why I say that is you don't necessarily pull back the DNS from the DNS provider. You pull back the DNS for the actual website you're looking up. And it'll give you all the information about that actual domain name versus the IP address. So if you want to know if it's associated to an email server, it'll tell you the MX records that are associated with it. If you want to know if it's associated to a website, it'll tell you the A records that are associated with it. If you want to know if there's any affiliation to CNAME information, it'll pull that back too. So let's run it against our internal server first to see the information that it pulls back. Now, when you go to the information gathering and you hit DNS analysis and you click this DNS recon, all it does is it opens up a command line or a terminal with it pre-populated with the dash H, which is help, which gives you the help output as to all the things that it can actually do. But for the sake of this video, we're only going to focus on one of those commands, which is a command that can be used as a helpful tool to do any DNS lookups on stuff that you are troubleshooting. So since there's absolutely no reason for me to click that, I'm just going to click back into the terminal here. And I'm going to type in DNS recon -D. And once I do that, I'm actually going to enter in my GenericTechSupport.local account, which is the part of my YouTube built domain controller. So and for those that are getting cheeky out there, no, it's not associated to GenericTechSupport.com. It has no integration. There is no SSO, and there is no configuration to anything integrating into that stuff. And there is multi-factor authentication set up across the board on everything. So don't get any ideas. Let's hit enter here and see what this pulls back. So you'll see right away when it pulls back the information, we could see that DNSSEC is not configured. So that is basically Microsoft's revision of DOH, which is DNS over HTTPS, or an encrypted DNS, and that server absolutely does not have that configured. That's a 2025 box that has no configuration on it. It's strictly created for the use of these videos. So we could see here after we run that it will enumerate the SRV records and give us all the SRV records, the server records that are associated to that particular box. Now, if you're in an internal infrastructure and you have a domain controller and you have a whole bunch of DNS issues, running this tool on your internal infrastructure may actually help you in figuring out what's going on with your DNS, why you're having DNS issues, what's broken, and how to fix it. Because you could see all the information that is in existence on the actual network, including the specific domain controller that's associated with when the records are pulled back. So if you pull it back for a multi-domain controller environment where you have multiple DNS servers all on DCs, it will translate all that information into the different DNS servers and different servers that exist on your infrastructure to help you troubleshoot problems that you find with DNS on your internal infrastructure. Okay, so what if we try this against a website, right? So what if we know that there is no DNS server particularly here, but we want to try it against just a regular website? So for instance, like archive.org, which is one of the ones that we would use for like grabbing ISO files of like ancient or legacy operating systems. So what happens if we run it against that? And if I just hit enter here, we could see that it's going to pull back information for the NS1 archive.org with the IP address. We see that it doesn't support DNSSEC, so it doesn't have DNS over HTTPS, so it doesn't support encryption, which is important to keep in mind because just because you have encryption set up on your DNS server or you're using encryption to Google, it's like, so for instance, in the browsers now you could configure like Cloudflare as the DOH support, so you get encrypted DNS. That only encrypts the data between you and the DNS server. The DNS server looking up the information on the outside doesn't necessarily pull it back encrypted. So it's still in clear text, at least for half the travel on most configurations and sites. And when you encrypt DNS, usually that DNS encryption slows down the lookup. So because you got to encrypt it, send the data, and then they got to decrypt it to pull the data, and then they re-encrypt it and send it back to you, and then you decrypt it to actually view it on your machine. So that's slower than just sending it and getting it back. So the only time that stuff really helps, like the DOH or the configuration to have encryption, like DNSSEC, is that when you have that, you can't do a man-in-the-middle attack between you and the DNS provider or the DNS source. That's all that really helps you with, which is kind of pointless because once it gets the DNS source, if the data on the other side isn't encrypted, it just slows down the whole process. Now, obviously, over time, this may change. We may end up in a situation where, DNS is encrypted all the way to the endpoint and back through, but it's not there yet. Much like AI isn't quite there yet with anything else, that is also not there yet. Speaking of which, today, I think in the news, GPT was breached. 30,000 accounts were, released, and millions and millions and millions of pieces of details and data was released as well. So from what I understand, GPT is just like a metacrawler for those GPT or AI systems, where basically it integrates with the Google one and the Chat GPT and the Chat GPT 4 and the Claude, I think it's Claude 35 or something like that. They're all different AI formats, and they all integrate into that GPT, so that way you could collect or pull data from all of those locations. Yeah, 30,000 of the accounts were actually breached and the data was leaked. So once again, AI is really not all that great. So the thing about AI that I want to just point out, because I do think that it has its usefulness, and I actually develop AI in Python currently for production tools. However, using it to ask it questions by putting in personal and private data on a system that you have no background on how the security is configured is a really stupid idea. So if you're going to build one yourself and secure it so that way your data won't leak, go for it. If you're going to use the Microsoft Copilot and you configure it correctly, go for it. But I will say with the Microsoft Copilot, with air quotes, they did leak the source code to hackers a couple years ago, and from what I have been told, there's no update to the source code. So that likely will just lead to another crack eventually with the Microsoft Copilot. So tread carefully or lightly on that. But if you secure these back ends of the actual systems where you're actually adding the AI system and questions to, then go for it. But if you're using a hosted platform AI, chances are it's not set up right or secured. So I wouldn't put anything personal into those things, because that information becomes public. Once it's on the internet, it's always on the internet. Even if you delete it thinking I've deleted it, no way, it's on the internet in a lot of places for 10 years plus because of compliance regulations. Okay, so back to this, right? So we did a DNS Recon D for archive.org, and we could see all the IP address information in here. We could also see the text records, right? So we have the text records, Google site verification, Brave Ledger. We could see the Microsoft stuff. We could see Salesforce.com integration. We could see the MX, so the mail.archive.org. We have an IP address to that. Now, once you have this information, what do you do with it? Now, if you're in IT, you know already that you could use the MX information to go to like MX Toolbox and either look up the IP address or look up the mail.archive.org and pull back who specifically hosts the stuff. This is how you would troubleshoot something like if you're getting spam messages constantly. You could figure out who the spammer is by putting the actual email address, the domain of the email address in here. It'll give you an IP address. You can look up that IP address to see who owns it, and then you could report that spam problem to the actual ISP or the service provider. And then legally, under the Canned Spam Act, they'll have to actually ban that or block that email address until it's resolved. So that's ways that you could use this software for legitimate purposes to actually help you in the day-to-day. And this is just one of many tools that exist in the Kali Linux package. So I tell you to check it out. And hopefully you enjoyed this short video. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Once again, if you guys have some crazy dating stories, leave them down in the comments. We've all been there. Love to read them. Thanks again for watching. We'll jump back into Kali at some point in the future and go over some more tools. Take it easy, guys. Thank you for watching the Generic Tech Support YouTube channel. Find the content of this video at https://generictechsupport.com/#channel.